I'm Alvaro Peralta with MiningIR. Welcome to AME Roundup. With me today, I have the Premier of Yukon, Premier Pillai. Welcome.
How are you doing? Thank you very much for having me.
It's great to see you here. We just saw you in London, and now we get to see you closer to home.
Yeah, the start of the year, being here, of course. Here, making sure that we're here with our team for the Yukon, telling our story and really talking about the great opportunities that exist to work in the Yukon, especially when we're focusing on this new interest in so many different commodity types.
Absolutely. You know, the Yukon is such an exciting story right now, with all the changes that are happening. And one of those changes is really around this whole ESG component that the mining industry is really embracing. And one of the things that's amazing about what's happening in the Yukon is your relationship with First Nations and how you've developed that. Tell me a little bit about how that is impacting environmental and social governance.
Yeah, I think if you look at the conversations that are happening here at Roundup, you'll hear a great focus on ensuring that First Nation governments are equal partners at the table with territorial and provincial governments, and that's what we're seeing right now. We are in the midst of building a brand new, modernized legislation for mining. We're doing it in a co-development model with First Nation governments, and that's something that the Yukon government committed to a long time ago. It's enshrined in our treaties with First Nation governments, and now that work is well underway. And that's really the epitome of ESG. That's about making sure First Nation governments are there to define with their values, their respect and stewardship for the land on how we move forward in a new mining environment.
I want to follow up that a little bit. How does that? How do you see that impact? How does it coming back to you? What are the First Nations doing differently now than they were doing maybe 10, 15 years ago?
No, I think First Nation governments were always ready to be at the table, to be true partners. But I think now we're seeing industry and other levels of government having a different view and respect for that interest. So for us right now, it's any ways that we can improve our environmental assessment processes, making sure that they're less cumbersome, but also making sure that they're still strong and they have the appropriate outcomes. And on the flip side, when we talk about our territorial legislation, it's really making sure that we sit down, our technical teams come together to give us the best competitive advantage globally, but at the same time, making sure First Nations governments have a real opportunity to define what they want to see with mining. And part of that as well is a real focus on land planning, which we do hand in hand with First Nation governments. We've got a number of plans that have been completed or are being worked on, and many to come. And that really gives you more certainty about how and where projects can be explored and where they can happen.
That's great. That's great. I imagine with that comes a lot of education.
Yeah, I mean, it's working with industry. We see it as it's all about partnership. It's about making sure that First Nations governments and territorial provincial governments are working hand in hand. We're reaching out to the federal government right now. There's a lot of different programs that have been announced specifically around funding for critical minerals infrastructure policy development. We want to capitalize on those opportunities and to leverage those programs. But as well, it's making sure that we have a real good sense of what industry needs to be competitive. This morning I had an opportunity to open up Roundup with Premier Eby. We have a great partnership. We're trying to ensure that British Columbia and the Yukon are aligned when it comes to infrastructure development, when it comes to regulatory improvements, so that companies, which there are many, that are working in British Columbia will have the same set of rules and landscape in British Columbia as they will in the Yukon and vice versa. And I think that gives us a competitive advantage in the country, but it also globally. Both our governments are looking at ensuring that we're at the forefront when it comes to economic reconciliation.
That's amazing. Excellent. Let's switch a little bit over to infrastructure.
Sure.
How does the current planned infrastructure look in the Yukon, and particularly in terms of transportation and energy?
Sure.
And what are you guys looking at to the future in terms of continuing to improve on what's already there?
Sure. Well, look, we'll start with transportation. We've got right now about a $500 million package that we're deploying for road construction. We've just finished a phase one road construction just north of Whitehorse in a community called Carmax. And it's a key piece of infrastructure for the Casino Mine project, which has now caught the eye of both Rio Tinto and Mitsubishi Materials. We've got identified projects throughout the Yukon where we want to use those funds. And we're in the midst right now of ensuring that First Nation governments have massive benefit through the development of those roadways. We also have just taken on a project for the Alaska Highway. It's the Nesutlan Bay Bridge. It's key for infrastructure into the north of Canada. It's about $180 million that's being spent on that project, and project's well underway. We've got $250 million right now going into Whitehorse International Airport, which is really important. We are an international hub. We have seasonal flights to Europe in the summertime. And again, we're making sure that we can have the right infrastructure to support the growth that we see coming at us. Also, we're working with the municipality of Skagway in Alaska, which a lot of folks don't know that we're only about an hour and a half away from Tidewater in Alaska. And so we're in the midst right now of a project where we're looking at building a marine services platform. The cost is between 40 and 45 million, and really in partnership looking to ensure that our miners and our private sector have access to Tidewater, and we have seamless ability to import products and goods too from a supply chain perspective. So they're very significant projects. When I think about other important pieces of infrastructure, I also should talk about the Dempster fiber line, which is a fiber optic line. We've been working on it for the last couple of years. It'll be
communications.
Yeah, and it's going to be completed in 2024. It's got a capex at about $100 million. Really complex project. It's almost 800 water crossings. It's directional drilling under the Mackenzie Delta. Most of that work's done. We're ready to light it up in 2024, and it actually will ensure that the entirety of Canada's north has redundancy, which we don't have. And when you think about the circumpolar world, Canada has been behind, but with this project, we'll be catching up. So again, very important project moving forward for us. So those are some really key. Switching to energy, we've got to, first of all, I think about 90% of our energy comes from renewable sources. A lot of hydro, of course, in play. Now we've brought on a number of renewable energy projects as well. We're looking to optimize the use of batteries in the north, which hasn't really been done. We're deploying some new infrastructure in 24, 25. But, our bigger conversation really is looking to the future, and that's a grid connection to the North American grid. And we've been working with BC to understand what their needs are. They want to see what our needs are. There's a lot of interest here in British Columbia. A call for power and a lot of investment has just been announced. But for us, it's really making sure that we leverage money from Canada through the critical minerals program to ensure that we can have a long-term, consistent source of clean energy. And, whether that's purchasing from British Columbia or other players in the North American market, it's just really important for us. And it's also about, it's a dual use project. We're going to need to have these energy sources in the Yukon when we think about Arctic security and sort of the long-term importance of the role the Yukon will play in a circumpolar world.
It certainly seems like electricity is going to be the fuel of tomorrow.
Yes.
And a huge part of decarbonization.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit around the regulatory environment.
Sure.
What can you tell our viewers in terms of the framework that governs the mining sector for the Yukon as far as regulation is concerned? How does that compare as well to other neighboring jurisdictions and across North America, really, because it's a small pond in a way?
Yeah, I mean, there's three kind of key things that happen when you're in this industry and you want to build a project. The first thing is an environmental assessment. We have a one-stop shop. In some jurisdictions, there's a provincial and a federal window that you have to go to.
So a lot less red tape.
Yeah, well, we're pulled together exactly into one entity, and that's populated our governance board with First Nation representation from the Government of Canada and the territorial government. So that's important. But also, we've been working very closely with First Nation governments over the last number of years to look at being able to reduce some of the red tape, still make sure it's strong, but and still make sure there's great partnership with First Nation governments in that process. So there's a lot more we'll be discussing in 2024. Hopefully, we'll be having the opportunity to make some real public statements, getting ready to go into the spring of this year. But I'll just say that work has really come to some great spots, and we think it's going to help the environmental assessment process. The other two things that need to happen, you need to have a quartz mine license, and if you're going to build a project. And that really ties into our mining legislation. And that's the work I mentioned earlier. It's about bringing everybody to the table and building a modernized system. Some of our legislation that we've looked at is 100 years old. It really has to be modernized. It goes back to, the early days of the gold rush in the Yukon. Things have changed. There's a different set of interests and a level of respect that has to be brought into this industry. And that work over the next couple of years will, again, give us a great opportunity for certainty. And the last piece is around our water license process. And we've been working very closely between the government of Yukon and our water board secretariat and our governance structure when it comes to the water licensing systems, and really looking at lots of ways that we can do to improve. I just, have sat with the board over the last month, and we think there's going to be enormous ways to make sure it's streamlined, but still keep the strength and the protection for the environment.
Particularly challenging now with decarbonization and this supply and demand that is quite out of whack already, and is only going to get worse over the next while. What does that mean in terms of the government putting forward initiatives to reduce the time it takes to actually get a mine producing and keep it producing?
Yeah, look, I think it's about scope. I think it's been scope creep, and I don't think we're the jurisdiction. We've seen it in the Yukon. I think you've seen it everywhere. So it's really about making sure that the standards are still strong when it comes to the environment, but really taking a deep look into your systems and understanding, what you're reviewing, what material you're reviewing, what is the outcome you really want to get to, and ensuring that there's not, turns and twists that take you in different directions from really the appropriate outcome, which is about protection, but also about getting projects to the right place. So I think that we're all going to be jockeying from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to make sure we have the best systems, because the best systems are going to lead to the most capital, and that's where you're going to see the economic benefit. And I think that's really what's going to drive interest. I mean, that's what we've seen in the past. So, I think that we're on the right path in the Yukon. I can only speak for the Yukon, but we're also, reflecting on what's happening in British Columbia, so that we can, have an entire west coast of this country that's really making sure that we grasp this opportunity that's in front of us, which it's a huge opportunity. I mean,
it is.
Yeah. We're at 25 of the 31.
And it's a critical opportunity.
It is. And, having 25 of the 31 identified critical minerals in our territory with huge quantums of some of the most sought after minerals, we need to get this right for a whole bunch of reasons.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question. Tell us a little bit about critical minerals, particularly the ones like lithium and whatnot. It's still fairly fresh in terms of the demand that's there, that's leading the exploration that's happening. How does Yukon fare as far as your knowledge of the minerals are concerned on a world stage?
Yeah, incredible mineral endowment. I mean, for us right now, we're looking at, when it comes to copper, we have some of the most promising projects on the entire globe. The same with zinc. We've got multiple zinc projects right now. We probably could be the supplier for Canadian zinc, for decades to come. Multiple projects. Same thing. We've got an opportunity for a tungsten project that could lead to 50 years of supply for North America when it comes to tungsten. And tungsten's one of those minerals. When you look at what's happening across the globe, it's really, the supply is controlled by 1 to 2 countries, and the same as many of these other minerals. So again, 25 of the 31 sought after critical minerals we have in the Yukon, and a real opportunity. And Rio Tinto, Teck Resources, some of the biggest players in the world are now coming in to partner with companies like Fireweed. We've got Newmont there that's, of course, looking at some other gold plays, but we've got Rio Tinto just south of that on the Casino project. BMC, which is just privately held at this point, but big international support. So when you think about all these different projects that are coming to fruition, it's a huge opportunity. We just got to get it right at the community level. We got to make sure that we're getting it right in partnership with Indigenous governments. We got to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in place. And if we can get those things right, it's going to be a big driver for the economy and a huge opportunity for the people of the Yukon.
I'm curious to know, how does that impact a more traditional mineral like gold?
Yeah,
which you guys have been known for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always been, the Yukon's always been known for gold. We just went through the 125th anniversary of the Yukon becoming a territory, and of course that harkens back to the days of the gold rush. But we learned our biggest lesson during 2020 and 2021. We saw the global economy shrink. We were in the middle of a pandemic, and we felt that industry had the best safety measures in place to ensure that their staff and the people in the communities around they work could stay safe. So we kept our industry running where other jurisdiction didn't. And we also saw significant strength in gold. And what we saw was we had the strongest economy in the country. I think it was 2020, we had a 10% growth in GDP, back the next year with more growth. So, I look at gold as not just an important element in our economy. I look at it as an insurance policy for the Yukon. Many jurisdictions don't have that opportunity. We do. So we're going to continue to be very supportive of what's happening in the gold space. When it comes to things like silver, like we've got Hecla now that have done an acquisition north of Mayo in the Yukon. There's a ton of mine life left there. Silver plays a very key role in the future economy. So we're always going to be supportive of those precious metals, and they're a huge opportunity, and they're always going to be a backbone and driver. I mean, Victoria Gold, Yukon's largest gold mine, was just built and developed over the last number of years. They've got a view for expansion. They're looking at acquisition of some other properties. They've got Banyan right next to them. Snowline, which is sort of the belle of the ball lately. It's been one of the most exciting projects in North America. Incredible. And all of those projects are all driven by Yukoners, which we're extremely proud of. These are all folks that have made the Yukon their home and are world leaders in this sector.
Amazing. We started off talking about the human resource and the relationships with First Nations, and obviously with all of the population and being stewards of the environment.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, with all this exciting growth potential that you have in the Yukon, what does that mean for immigration policy and for in a country with an aging population, as most of the Western world is? Yeah. What are some of the initiatives that you're taking to invite people to explore making Yukon home? Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine balance. We're in a position, number one, where we've led population growth in the entire country over the last 5 years. We were for a 5-year period, I think we were at about just over 12% growth, and we continue to have strong growth. When it comes to immigration, our policies are really applications come from the private sector through something called the Yukon Nominee Program, which then leads to opportunities for immigration. It's really economic immigration. We used all of the allotments that we had from Canada last year. We had to go back to the federal government and ask for some more spots, which we were granted, and those were used. And these are companies that are owned by Indigenous governments. They're owned by Indigenous trusts. They're owned by Yukoners. All of these economic entities that are actually saying, hey, we need to have people come in. But you have to balance that. And you have to balance that with making sure you have the right deployment of capital into housing and the right strategies. Yeah, and it's been a strain. I mean, we've had, because of that growth, like anywhere else in Canada, it's been difficult. It's driven up housing prices. And so a big focus for me as Premier has been making sure that I keep a keen eye on housing. So I've kept that portfolio, which is not a normal undertaking for a Premier. And in 2024, we're pretty excited. We see a number of projects we've been working on. We're ready to invest in them. And I think you're probably going to see some of the biggest investment in housing in our territory's history. And that's our parallel strategy to keep up with the population and growth needs that our economy has.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, Premier Pillai. It has been very eye-opening to hear some of these comments that I wasn't aware of, that 12% growth. That's amazing. I didn't realize that Yukon was leading the way when it came to population growth in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you.
Real pleasure. Okay. Thank you.